The Production Line, bringing you the stories, the issues, the ideas, the people, the conversations that matter. Make UK's annual Facts and Figures report is a reliable barometer of UK manufacturing standing in the world, who we sell to, what sectors are up and what are down, which regions are doing well, and why manufacturing provides such great jobs. Inevitably, though, it's a snapshot. And with the new government in place, committed to a full-blown industrial strategy, it's worth unpicking some of the stories behind the data and how they might inform that strategy. My guests this week on the production line are Verity Davidge, Director of Policy at Make UK, and Michael Lewis, Professor of Operations and Supply at Bath University's School of Management. Verity Davidge, the facts and figures from Make UK. What does this data tell us?
So we've launched our annual manufacturing fact card, and as always it's got a wealth of great manufacturing data in. So as we see from previous years, manufacturing average earnings are above the economy average. We see we're very much R&D kind of intensive. We're exporting to both Europe, the US. But I think the one that's probably going to grab your attention is, for the first time in a a long time, or indeed since we've started this, the UK has actually fallen out of the top 10 when it comes to the top manufacturing nations. And that's the one, Nick, that we might want to delve into a little bit more.
Well, let's just quickly talk about that, Verity, because what we want to know really is whether that is down to any major structural problems, issues we've experienced in the UK manufacturing sector, or is it the result of anything else happening around the world?
It's more akin to the latter. It's not a fact that the UK manufacturing hasn't grown. That's not the case. I should note actually also France and Italy have fallen out of the top 10 as well. So if it's who has made the cut then, we've actually seen Mexico enter the top 10 for the first time, and this is the result of a lot of Chinese investment made in Trump's first presidency to kind of counter tariffs. We have seen Russia enter the top 10, spurred on by huge defence production for obvious and sadly unfortunate reasons. And thirdly, Taiwan. And if I say the words to you, semiconductors, I think you'll understand why. Huge global demand, and of course Taiwan dominates there. So those are the sort of the three that have gone in, and indeed the three that come out, and unfortunately that includes the UK.
Mike, it feels rather like listening to the top 10 back in the day. Who's up, who's down. One thing we can't ignore is the fact that China is just racing ahead. It's something like 3 trillion manufacturing economy, way ahead of the US, which is in second place, and Germany is, still big, but nowhere near as large. China is just dominating the world economy now, isn't it?
Yeah, closer to 5 trillion, I think, than 3. The profound geopolitical, I hesitate to use the word, given we've just talked about Russia, but the weapon that the Chinese economy has built with its manufacturing capability is starting to have a fundamental effect on the way that the world economy looks. It's always been seen, I guess, as a kind of complementary strategy. Well, who wanted to make low-cost items anyway? Our people would work on high-value manufacturing, a phrase you hear a lot. But ultimately, the transition from low-cost, low-value manufacturing to the highest cost, high-value manufacturing is starting to bite. Even Germany, and you're right to say that Germany is probably the country which was the best at that complementing strategy. We'd sell you expensive cars and machine tools, and you would give us the lower-cost stuff at a lower value, and that would work in a beautiful circular way. But now, well, as the Chinese economy comes to electric vehicles, that's starting to look very scary to the Germans as well. So there's some profound geopolitical elements to this as well. The question of the ranking, well, I mean, in Britain we love a ranking. The whole country is a sorting hat, if you know your Harry Potter. But the idea of 12, 10, 9 is literally meaningless. But there are significant fundamental questions that we need to unpack when we hear conversations about Mexico's rise, for instance. You're absolutely right. Verity stresses the Trump intervention to use tariffs, repeated now recently with Biden. That hasn't really changed that narrative. The European Union imposing tariffs into the EV market to try and, back to Germany again, control some of that EV penetration. But what's really happened, Chinese economy hasn't slowed, its manufacturing scale hasn't reduced. The pathway to our markets has changed. We now go via Mexico or Vietnam or countries that we don't have tariff regimes in place in. So the market has shifted, but Chinese dominance maintains.
Okay, so let's assume and take for granted, take as read, the fact that whatever else is happening in the world we can't control, but we do have a manufacturing sector which the new Labour government does want to reinforce and perhaps change its direction. Verity, identify, if you will, the gaps that Michael's been talking about, the fact that with volume manufacturing this country disappeared. Is there any intent to get some of that back into the UK? And if so, how will we do it?
I think absolutely. I think already we're hearing the sort of kind of noises that we want to hear from a new government. We hear actually manufacturing being talked about a lot more. We are hearing the words industrial strategy. And again, we'll come onto that a bit later. But, it did actually begin a little bit in the last government where we had the commitment around advanced manufacturing and the advanced manufacturing plan. Now, for us, we sort of wanted to expand and broaden that definition of advanced manufacturing. It sort of cuts out quite a lot of, potential advanced manufacturers and particularly kind of those SMEs. We wanted it to look more like a New Zealand definition, which again is less focused on kind of product, more in processes as well. So we are beginning to see, I think, that move towards we do have great manufacturing capabilities. We can take first mover advantage on so many new technologies, but we need to make sure that the policy and enablers and infrastructure is around that to allow manufacturing to grow.
Yeah, again, we'll come on to a bit of that, but let's just talk about the industrial strategy. Figures announced just in the last 24 hours, US announced 2.8% growth, which people are waving a flag about, pretty damn good. And a lot of that is off the back of business investment, which has been very poor in the UK, and government subsidy, Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act. Rachel Reeves has been taking notes, copious notes, over the last couple of years in the run-up to getting into government about what the IRA has been doing. Mike, she must be pretty optimistic as we speak about the fact that it's clear that this kind of policy that the UK government wants to emulate does actually start to generate growth.
I think it does start to generate growth. I mean, how can it not? You're spending the kind of quanta of borrowing essentially into your economy, and rightly you point out it's not just been sprayed, it's been targeted. And again, we're back to electric vehicles. A lot of this conversation, the batterification of the world proceeds apace, and the Americans trying to recover some of their lost ground there. Likewise in semiconductors. It's interesting, we talked about Taiwan before briefly, but that whole question of the so-called chips war is again intermingled with national security. And what one has to be careful here, of course, because sometimes when I hear industrial strategy, yes, Theresa May had a council, and we can re-engage with that conversation many times, but it can be a little bit of the Quango shuffle, right? I'll print out the document I wrote in 1989 about industrial strategy. It wouldn't look a lot different to the one that we see today. The context is different, though. We are post-pandemic. We are in a period of geopolitical uncertainty. Resilience and local production has a much more urgent meaning than it did, and I think that's shifted American thinking profoundly. We are facing a climate crisis, a catastrophe in some ways, and consequently the way we do production will have to change. And there's the transitional opportunity of the green technology wave, which again is part of the American dynamic as well. And there is, I'm afraid, the defense industrial strategy question as well. The Americans couldn't pull that lever too hard because they were already spending 10 times more than the rest of the planet combined on weapons. But certainly UK and Europe can start to look at its defense strategy in a different way as it ramps up GDP spend on defense. So the context is different. And I think now those questions of, as you say, you see in America, if you pull those levers, you can start to have an impact. The fly in the ointment, the worry that for all of the investment, all of the transformational jobs being created, all the skills development, the political benefits to the party that lead that don't seem to be as clear as they should be. And so that will make any politician bear a moment and say, hang on, perhaps we have to do things a little bit differently. But yeah, I'm sure she's looking closely at the IRA and the CHIPS Act.
Verity, you spend a lot of time in the corridors of Whitehall and Westminster. The whole point of an industrial strategy is it's not just coming from one department and then firing off memos to other departments to chip in. It's got to be a broad brush effort right across all departments. But it takes a long time, and as Mike suggests, the political payback can be very slow, if ever, in coming. Do you sense that the new Labour government actually understands that and is prepared to put this in stone for as long as it takes, and perhaps not try to reap the political rewards, which may be a long time coming?
I think one of the real positives that we saw in the King's speech was the commitment to put the Industrial Strategy Council on a statutory footing. And that means that it cannot just simply chop and change as we've seen previously with the change of government, or even, as we have witnessed, with a change of Secretary of State. So I think that is really positive. And the feedback that I'm hearing from manufacturers on the ground is this, greater sense of positivity, this greater sense of longevity. And these are the sort of things that they need to hear to make those investments that to date have been lagging. We talk so much about taking advantage of the net zero and digitalization and AI and robotics and all these fantastic things, but we still haven't had enough policies, enough that aren't piecemeal policies. We haven't had that long-term strategy. So we haven't quite just got firms over that kind of edge just to really put that investment in. And I think we might be at a turning point. And I think as we head towards the end of the year and into 2025, we'll find, credit will become cheaper. We'll find this stability. And I think we will begin to see that increased business investment. And you might be talking to us next year and we're back in the top 10.
That is, if everything else in the world plays ball.
Well, if everyone else, just stops doing what they were doing, then that's fine.
Yeah, I really don't care if we're in the top 10, but if we see a substantial commitment to a longer term industrial strategy, then yes, that will be fine. I can be 100 with that rather than 9 without it, because the trajectory is in a different place. I mean, I just pick up on one thing, because I completely agree with and endorse all of that. Statutory instrument is, can be changed as quickly as it can be created. So I'm a little bit nervous. I think it'll be very interesting to see how the opposition, although we are thinking it's a 10-year government, because of, I think we can also see a very volatile electorate. And I don't think we can necessarily guarantee that. And so consequently, it'd be very interesting to see how the opposition responds to those questions. If they themselves engage with them, then I have more confidence. But you're absolutely right. One of the great challenges in this country has always been the soundbite and the bingo a card of let's do this, let's do that, initiatives bouncing all over the place. And as an investment environment, you're constantly checking back and forth. Oh, there's a box I can get over there. There's a pork barrel I can scrape over there. That is terrible for long-term capability growth. So stabilizing it, committing to it. But as you say, Nick, they may get no electoral benefit for doing all those things. So does he really mean service? If he does, it's a good sign.
Well, the extraordinary fact that came out of a report, I think it was by Giles Wilkes at the Institute for Government, and Giles was a guest on the show a few weeks ago. He said that the report said that 70% of business investment came from companies' own funds. So only 30% came through either traditional routes of borrowing from banks, asset finance, etc., etc. Verity, this must be crucial, finding new sources of funds. And also, I suppose that's the stability you've been talking about and saying that we're aiming for, that will give companies the confidence, if new funds come along, to be able to borrow without the fear of losing the house.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's what our work on access to finance has always shown. Companies would prefer to go often into their overdrafts or use funds or even borrow funds from family friends if they are in a fourth, generation manufacturing firm, and rather take out, bigger, more expensive loans if they are able to secure them to begin with. And I think that has been one of the major problems. And particularly now for many companies, and especially for SMEs, they are still in that post-COVID era where some of them have only just paid back all their CBILS loans and other COVID-related loans. So they haven't really just had that, cash to make the investment. And I think sometimes there is that slight, better save it for a rainy day as well. So I think we need to really kind of unleash that ability to access capital. And as I mentioned, we do think kind of cash will get a bit, credit will be getting cheaper, but you have to have the policies environment that surrounds that to actually make that work. Otherwise, any cash that they have, I think they'll just sit on.
Yeah, Mike, you're saying basically it's cash plus confidence equals investment.
Yeah, 100%, but also a recognition again of the environment. And so if you have supportive environment, if you can go to a world-class leading center of robotics research who have 25 years of deep experience in implementing these robotics across the workshop floor, then you can get that kind of easy decision making. You can build your business case out with some expert advice. It's not just getting the bank to tell you how they put the business case together. It's the capability part of that question as well. So there's something about the consistency of that's hugely important, and not removing things like the manufacturing advisory service and other services that were really effective and throwing them out the window for whatever reason. But the idea of that consistency of a context to allow people to make decisions to invest, I think there's so little of more importance than that. So.
Verity, the obviously the commitment to green industries, green jobs. We've just had Great British Energy announced Jürgen Meyer as chairman. All this is, being well received. But it's not just the green industries. There's so much innovation going on in the UK, coming out of universities, and some of the companies that do make it beyond TRL 123 and manage to get almost across the valley of death, as they call it, only to find there's not enough finance, and then they get snapped up. I'm obviously going to mention Graphcore, maker of AI chips, which was picked up recently by Japan's SoftBank. I mean, SoftBank picked up Arm Holdings, which was, the chips inside most of the top-end electronic devices in the world. We've got to keep this kind of innovation inside the country, and so that it works to our benefit right across the board. Do you see the new government, having any awareness of that?
I think we do, and I think that it almost kind of circles, back to our points around, joined up departments, not siloing. One of the benefits of a mission-led government is it tends to be less siloed, and yes, there will always need to be a set place for, say, the industrial strategy, and our understanding is it will sit in DBT. No surprise there. It's being headed up by Jonathan Reynolds. He was the one that wrote it to begin with. But actually, that mission-led approach does bring in all of those departments. So when a company is looking to grow, is wanting to move from the S to the M, which I think is that kind of that critical move, is that it knows we need policies in all of those touch points, because you don't just need access to finance, because if you need finance to buy capital, you need people to service that capital. And already you're talking to 4 or 5 government departments without even thinking, well, actually, is this a piece of kind of green technology that I need to go to DesNets for? Is there something I can apply for in DSIT? And these are companies who are trying to run a business, who are trying to keep people employed, and meanwhile they have to navigate such a complicated landscape that, it's often a question that I get of, do you know what funding is available for X? Whether it's to recruit people, retain people, to access, to switch from gas to electricity. And it is an absolute minefield. There is the balance to be had of like flexibility, but also simplicity. And I think that is, again, something we really need to call for of, we need to make growing your business easy. It is hard to start up and it is getting harder to scale up. But we really need to kind of remove those barriers and put in policies that enable that to happen easily. So we don't see people just kind of buying up potentially great British businesses.
Yeah, and talking Verity as you do to government all the time, I'd be remiss not to mention the fact that small manufacturing companies in the UK feel that government perennially looks after big companies, only listens to big companies because they've got the lobby groups, they've got the loudest voices, and the SMEs get left out. Now, do you believe that the Industrial Strategy Council will make room for SME representation? And indeed, are you asking the government to do that, to make the SME voice heard?
Oh, I think that we will, if SME representation is not on the council, we will absolutely be campaigning for them to be on the council, and we have been previously. For us, the majority of Make UK members are those SMEs, and the fewer big businesses. Many of those SMEs are, of course, in their supply chains. But again, we've seen, I think just last week, we saw an SME task force on exporting. So really focusing in on that SME element. And I think that is a huge shift to what we have seen previously, that actually there are things dedicated to SMEs. Whenever we survey our members and we look at breakdowns, I could give you two completely different reports of the 1,000 plus employees and then everybody else. And I think it's critical that we take that into account when formulating those policies for growth.
Yeah, Mike, the final point about industrial strategy, and if you scratch a conservative who's got a long memory, they'll say industrial strategy is just about companies queuing up at the Treasury, begging for a handout, begging bowls out. And because that's what they saw industrial strategy as the disasters of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, or deindustrialization in the 80s, but you know what I mean. That's how they characterize industrial strategy. And I think it's important that what's happening now is not communicated as a kind of, oh, well, there's free money that I can go and get for my company.
I think there's something here about, yes, just as a national industrial strategy needs to be clear on what it's not going to do. And one of my concerns, Nick, when you say it's everything, is any strategy that's everything is not a strategy. So I think there are some questions about maybe beginning to think about picking winners. I worry about quantum computing, for instance, where you're absolutely right. We had this Southwest success story, right? Bristol, Bath and the region really, and impacted by government money through EPSRC and other investments. And it grew and it got scale, and then the money dropped away, as if now was the time to push ahead rather than being the time to back off because of the philosophy of not picking winners or something. But so there's something about the Nationals policy being less about saying, here's what we can do for you, here's what we're not going to do. But I think the same, yes, that community of businesses who've probably been trained over the last 20 years to expect Verity's point. Who do I speak to? Well, more clarity around what I'm going to do, what I'm not going to do, would perhaps lead you to say, what am I going to do, not what am I going to ask for. So I think there is something about that balance between the role of the company, what it's able to do, and the role of the state, what it's able to do. But there's something we haven't talked about, which of course is the regulatory environment as well. And that's been another area, huge uncertainty post-Brexit. We haven't mentioned Brexit either, but we should, because it's still having a deleterious, significant effect on our performance. But the regulatory environment is, again, a potential area where the UK has some possibility to be more flexible, more creative in supporting some of those growth agenda. I don't know, again, if we have the scale in government to be flexible and responsive, but there's certainly an opportunity. We have a crisis now. It's an opportunity to flip that round.
Yeah, Verity, on the regulatory point, and thank you, Mike, for raising it. I mean, we hear that from some quarters, and this is mainly political, that breaking free from Brexit gave us the chance to write our own rules and not be beholden to Brussels. But if you're a small country like us, exporting to a massive trade bloc like the EU, like the United States, wherever, we've got to have regulations that overlap with their own, or else we're just not going to do it. So where is this argument going? I mean, I've heard, for instance, that the chemicals industry, which at first fought against UK REACH, is now, I believe, wanting UK REACH to go ahead. And that seems to me like a lot of money being spent on re-regulating something that didn't need regulating.
Yes, and Mike is right. It's, the other thing that always comes up amongst our members. I don't think we've seen kind of that, burning of red tape. And actually, when you start asking and unpicking companies, what do they want to lose? Well, actually, I don't want to lose any kind of health and safety regulation, because that's really important to keep our people safe. Employment rights, they're also really important to kind of retain and recruit employees. That said, companies are a little bit nervous about some of the stuff that is in Labour's New Deal. And then, of course, just aligning with the EU, which we've begun to sort of hear those noises and movements from the new government recently, that they will try to align. And then the other, I guess, key issue that our members are talking to us about all the time at the moment is CBAM. That is kind of their number one issue on their kind of list of things that need fixing and fast.
Just explain that for us, Verity.
The border adjustment mechanism. So this is all about adding kind of tariffs to what we import and re-export, and the EU have one, and so if we didn't have one at the UK, it wouldn't be a level playing field. Now we are playing catch up now, where we will have a UK CBAM, but we are already behind what the EU is doing. So, once again, we haven't quite moved fast enough, and it really kind of risks leaving certain sectors uncompetitive. So that's one of the major problems at the moment.
Yeah, I can't stress that enough, though, Nick, just to emphasise that the regulatory space, and it splits across. If we're talking about novel technologies and future technologies, then we do have the possibility to be the regulatory drag you're describing, the centre of gravity of the giant EU and North American regulatory spaces, doesn't apply in the same way. So I think that's a distinct question. But then the wider question about the effect the state has on the way the business works, I think that's a really important one, and is perhaps missing a little in our industrial strategy conversations at the moment.
Okay, well, I think that Mike suggested that this conversation could be had anytime every month for the next 10 years, and has been happening for the last 50 years. So we hope that we brought some heat and light, light, not heat, to the conversation around the future of the UK manufacturing sector. Just to conclude, I get the feeling that, we talked about rebalancing and about change. It's almost like the UK economy, manufacturing sector rather, has been like an old V12 engine, which hums along and is really great at what it does, but it needs to turn itself into a lightning fast EV. And I think that's really the challenge. How do we get from here to there? And you, Verity, suggested that this is a critical moment, that this is the point. Perhaps if we don't do it now, maybe we never will.
Yeah, and I think, Mike mentioned it, it's all about confidence. If we increase business confidence, if we can lower business costs, then we become more competitive. And that's what we really need. And I think, as I mentioned, maybe I'm just in a very optimistic mood at the moment with the new government, but it does feel already that companies just feel a little bit more confident. We have put, hopefully, the kind of the COVID behind us. Obviously, geopolitical events continue, but there is that move to actually we could do more and we can do more. And I think we just need that the government to ensure that they do more.
No, just to return to my question, we face some really significant existential challenges as a country, as a planet, right? And I think the idea of turning those to opportunities for us to really rethink about national infrastructure, national defense, national security. These are questions of existential threat. And so if we can build our industrial strategy to make sense of those, I think we have a unique opportunity that we haven't had in that last post-war, right? Post-Second World War, when perhaps the UK was last at its industrial scale. The challenge is always going to be keeping that front and centre when so many other challenges come to the fore.
Well, Mike Lewis, thank you very much indeed. Verity, Davidge, thank you too. This has been looking at the Make UK Facts and Figures 2024. Here's hoping that next time we're showing some really good results from that survey, and 2025 is going to be a grand year for UK manufacturing. Thank you both.
Thank you.
The production line is produced by Manufacturing TV. If you'd like to suggest a story for the production line, maybe you'd like to be on it, or perhaps your company would like to sponsor the program, email info@ukmfgmedia.com, info@ukmfgmedia.com, or go to our website ukmfg.tv.